Our next panel, The Last Frontier Market, Commercial Opportunities in a Democratic Iran, will explore the vast economic opportunities presented by a secular, democratic Iran as one of the world's largest remaining frontier markets and contrast these opportunities with the limited gains from previous agreements like the JCPOA. We will be joined by Rostam Zafari, an investor, head of the World Within Foundation, and a Nufti advisor, Dave Furneaux, CEO of Blue IO, Saeed Ghasseminejad, a senior economic advisor for the Foundations of Defense of Democracies, and Amir Sharif-Emami, Iran Prosperity Project.
Just wanted to first thank Nufti for having us, and what a lovely event, multiple panels that have been great, and hopefully we can put one to match. Just wanted to start with some of the basic facts of the peer we've been comparing ourselves to in the prompt, South Korea. So South Korea has a population of 50 million and a GDP of 1.8 trillion. Iran at the same time has a population of 80 million, whereas its GDP in 2021 was about 360 billion. So with that as a backdrop, and as if you sort of rewind the tape and say, where were the two countries in 1980? Where could Iran be today? It's a very easy line to draw to see where the potential is for the Iranian economy, and sort of would love to begin with sort of the vast experiences in emerging markets and some of the criteria that are evaluated when looking at investments in emerging markets and what you think Iran can provide in that room in the future.
So first of all, thanks for Nufti for hosting us, and an amazing couple days, great panels. And one thing I'm most excited about is how many solutions have been presented. I've been to a lot of conferences where it's complaining, and I've seen a lot of solutions and tangibles here. So you mentioned South Korea. South Korea's GDP is about 3 times the size, more actually, probably 5 times the size of Iran's, with 30 million less people, and none of the same natural resources that Iran has. I think it's very obvious to everyone in this room what a free Iran represents in terms of attracting investors, in terms of fostering the innate kind of founder talent. What makes a great entrepreneur? The ability to take risk. What have young Iranians been doing for decades now? Taking risks. So for me, it's a no-brainer. But that being said, one reason I'm really excited about Nufti's IPP, the Iran Prosperity Project, that's been in development and people here like yourself been working on, is we talk a lot about the political readiness we need to have in place when the Islamic Republic eventually falls. What we also need is have a financial plan in place. Right now, we need to start gearing up for how do we move our family offices, our firms, the corporations we either own or work with. How do we get them ready for that outcome? That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I'll just touch on the Iran Prosperity Project. So we began this in late 2022, early 23, and it's a 2-phase project with 2 phases and then also 2 intentions to each phase. So the first phase is focusing on stabilization within providing a first-year budget, privatizing the quasi-state-owned assets, stabilizing the banking and currency systems, financial markets, and the welfare system. And again, the 2 phases of each part of that is a 6-month to 1-year plan, and then the long-term horizon. And then we have been very fortunate to have generous supporters, and we are in the process of beginning an evaluation for a phase 2, which would include the similar evaluations for the energy infrastructure, industrials, defense and avionics, financials, tourism, and technology verticals of Iran. And with that, would love to talk to Dave about just kind of setting the foundation for an environment where these kinds of economic factors can thrive.
Sure. It's good to be here. And it's been really great taking this in. Rostam, thanks for inviting me. I was lucky because I grew up right in the middle of the innovation economy from when I was a kid. I saw it. So I feel so lucky that I had that ride early in my career. And it then took me from this mindset of forming companies to then solving problems. And that then took me as a bridge to other economies. And if I look at what's needed in order to create great foundation and strength in Iran, once you achieve, which I'm sure you will, which we all will help you achieve, democracy, the word that is most important is stability. You need stability to bring in the bridges, in the partners, to then accelerate the growth in the country. That's the most important thing.
And so that brings us to the next point, which is Saeed, why don't you talk about some of the sort of government elements that would be required to help with that foundation being set?
Thank you for having me. So I wasn't supposed to be here. Someone more accomplished, better suited to talk about this was supposed to be here, but he couldn't do it. So, but anyway, I think me being here keeps you closer to the homeland because of my strong Persian accent. So, and I'd like to start this with something that Sarina Ismailzadeh, a 16-year-old girl who was killed during the last year protest, said she was kind of a YouTuber, and in one of her videos she says, what can someone expect from her country? And he says, prosperity, prosperity, prosperity. And Iranians have so many regrets about the 1979 revolution, social freedoms, the respect, international respect, the security, but the most important one is prosperity. And you actually hear it in their slogans. One of the most interesting ones, actually two. I heard like they were pretty old. I think they were in the revolution themselves, if they were involved there. And they were saying, we made such a mistake that we revolted. And another one, they chant the sedition of 57, the 1979, is the root cause of the poverty of the nation. And that's something we see in what people say and in the data. So Amir talked about the South Korea. So before the revolution, the data is available till the 60s. So when you look at Iran, Turkey, and South Korea, look at the GDP per capita, Iran's GDP per capita was higher, much higher than both countries, and was actually growing at a much faster pace. So today, Iran's GDP per capita is around 4,000. Turkey's is around 9,000, 10,000, and South Korea's is around 35,000. So that's the cost of the revolution. Actually, one of my good friends, Mohammad Jahanparvar, one of the best Iranian American economists, has a paper on that, the opportunity cost of the revolution. Iranian lost a lot because of that revolution. That's something that can be easily quantified. Do you want to go to the next round, and I can? Yeah. Because I talk too much.
It's enjoyed. But yeah, so Dave, if you could talk a little bit about outside of the, basically the Iranian people, despite the repression, and have exceeded in a number of STEM categories and competitions in robotics and mathematics and across the board, the potential human capital that's locked up, and some of the other sectors besides the energy sector that are attractive or could become attractive.
Sure. Well, one thing's for sure, that the ability to establish strength, global strength in an area, it doesn't have to take 50 years. It can take 10 or 20 years. In 1993, how many cybersecurity software companies were in Israel? Any guess? One. So there was one. And how many cybersecurity software companies are there in Israel today? Not 1,000, but over 500. And so an industry was created. Same thing in biotechnology. There's 200 biotechnology companies. And Israel, by population, is much smaller than Iran. And so it's about creating the fertility, creating the environment for innovation to come in. In the case of both those industries from Boston and doing the work I do of forming and building companies, we created those bridges early on into Israel, for example. And then once we built those relationships, they started to take hold, and then the strength shifted. Because as global companies start to acquire valuable teams in the new economy, in the new area, then they gain strength and then they invest. And so we've had the really great experience of birthing companies in the United States and then seeing them establish themselves in other places. Some of them have worked well, like I mentioned Israel, but we've also worked in Latin America, South America, Canada, China, Taiwan, and we've had varying degrees of experiences. Some were really great, and then they continued to grow, and others were not. And a lot of it came down to what I said earlier, which is stability, having stability and predictability in the way the human beings were working together, in a system that allowed that to be very transparent and open. It comes back to people, really, at the end of the day.
That's a perfect transition.
Do you mind if I jump in on that?
Sure,
Because
go.
you talk about stability. We've been talking about stability that investors need. It's a prerequisite, especially when you're talking about institutional capital. But also, founders need stability. There are startup hubs in Iran, but when you lose electricity for government shutdown, internet shutdowns, when you can't get clients because of the reputational risk, how do you build a startup, right? And going back to people, you can't have a real economy in a country that hates women, right? You can't have that. There's 15% of Iranian women are in the workforce. We're playing with half our team, in my opinion, in the economy. So I think those are both to your point in terms of the stability and the people. We have to be able to, see that equality from a gender lens, and we also have to be able to support founders with the bare necessities.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one of the main problems in Iran, startup or any other kind of business activities, is that Iran really doesn't respect the property rights. And the key foundations in Iran that are controlling a lot of economy, a big part of the economy, these are built on confiscating other people's assets, like the ستاد اجرایی فرمان امام خمینی, the مستضعفان foundations. They started by confiscating the assets of people who were close to the Shah government. Then continued this by confiscating the assets of dissidents, Baha'is, anyone that they didn't like. And the legal infrastructure in Iran really does not exist to protect the property rights, so there is really no stability for investors and founders and normal people.
Yeah, and I think one of the other elements about the Iran Prosperity Project that's important to note is that it's not just supposed to be a white paper sitting in the abyss. The intention is for it to be an operational plan. And I think one of the other elements to consider is that it's not just for the Iranian people to see that there is a plan, but also for non-Iranians to see and also more importantly realize that the door won't just open. I think a lot of the sort of hopes of the past decade have been that Iran will just sign a deal and then things will go to a normal kind of developing economy relationship. And some of these foundational elements that if you just on a basic level evaluate the country, you guys have invested in other parts of the world. Why don't you speak to some of the basic parts of the process of evaluations and the layers those investments have to go through even before anyone could participate in the opportunity set?
One of the things we look through is we look through a lens of resource constraint that leads you to the word security, and then you can use the word security to kind of go into health and food and digital security and in other areas. And it comes back down to human need. And so when I look at what the world needs, or we can talk about Iran specifically, I would imagine, for example, that Iran needs food production. It needs food security, food safety. There are solutions out there. I'm actually working on one, for example, where we produce tremendous amounts of food with 99% less water. So how do we identify the pillars of technologies that are going to lead the next 10, 20, 30 years in the different areas that need to be worked on, and put a plan in place now and get on your toes so that you're ready with the bridges already built to come into the country and be able to make those transformations quickly. That's all possible. It's all something that can be achieved. The solutions are amazing. Identifying what the problems are and then matching them up to what's being solved today is totally achievable.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, when you're looking at emerging markets, you're looking at in areas with governments who are trying to create an environment where they're attractive to you. Like people say, we invest in Africa. When people say that, there's 4 or 5 countries within Africa that people invest in. They're the ones like Nigeria, like Tanzania, like Kenya, that are open for business, and they make other investors feel comfortable. If they're U.S. investors, they usually have an entity here, a subsidiary in that country, and they are familiar with the laws there. There's 6 or 7 criteria the World Bank lists in terms of ease of doing business, right? Starting a business, getting the paperwork, IP law, that's a huge one, IP protection, access to electricity, access to credit lines. We talk about South Korea, which Prince Rostam said, hey, we're supposed to be South Korea, we're North Korea. We have to look at what they did, right? They're in the top 4 or 5 for ease of business. Iran currently is in the 170s, right? It's the lowest in all of the Middle East and North Africa, right? So that's pretty embarrassing. So when we address that, what else did they do that made it so accessible, right? They invested a lot in education early on. They really put a high premium on teachers, right? They're per capita, per million people, they do about over 3,000 patents a year, right? The US is around 800. Iran has that brain power. We have over 5 million undergrad students. We have the young, educated, and even, I think, over South Korea, we have a younger population. They're now aging. They have to deal with that. But we have a young, educated population. Give them the fertile soil to be able to build and bring in these kinds of technologies and implement them. That's the framework. And I think really, really importantly is per region, they have different challenges, different opportunities, different gifts. Some might be, building up the wine section. Some might be tourism. But making sure that every part of Iran and every Iranian has buy-in to that prosperity. It can't be, okay, well now the rich run the country again. It's just another nouveau rich. We need to have barabari. We need to have equality there. So this urban-rural divide we can bridge that gap. I think that's critical. We've seen that on the protests. It used to be mostly just lower class people coming to protest. Now you see the whole lower, middle, upper class. Everyone is in it to see this regime fall. Everyone needs to benefit from the regime falling.
Yeah, I think, as you said, I think a huge part of it is the intra-Iran normalization of cultural differences, but also the West and just the people here familiarizing themselves. And to some degree, there's been a benefit from the, one of the other things in the prompt was Dubai and Neom. Like those two are helping expose the West to some of the cultural factors. And a lot of my friends who don't know the rules in Saudi Arabia or Dubai are surprised when they go there and they see, oh, this doesn't happen or this can't happen. And in a future Iran where you envision, some of those things not being in place, there is still a cultural layer that, some other parts that I'm not, thinking of top of mind that will need to be there. So, that's just a comment. But as far as opportunity set, Saeed, if you want to sort of tee up maybe the healthcare and other specific, maybe just like areas where the domestic economy is in, bad management.
I'd like to talk first about what the current situation is, what are the problems, so then we can discuss what the solutions can be. So the goal should be to go back to the golden age of Iranian economy, when you had double-digit growth rate, low inflation, low unemployment. So that's the goal. Over the last 4 decades, unfortunately, you have always had double-digit inflation, very low growth rate, very high unemployment, especially the youth unemployment. And the key reason for that is basically you have an apocalyptic regime which really doesn't care about the about growth that much. So that's really the root cause of the problem. But if you look into the details, you have bad domestic policies, you have bad foreign policy, and you have bad fiscal and monetary policy. And so when you don't have competition at the top, when you prioritize loyalty over experience and expertise, then you have a lot of people working in the government that they really don't know what they're doing. So that will show itself in the inflation, in the economic growth that we talked in unemployment. So the moment you actually bring competition to the political race, you will get rid of it to a certain degree. You have a lot of corruption in Iran. The key reason is that you don't have freedom of press. So if you have free newspapers, they can actually root out corruption to a certain degree, not all of it. So that will get rid of some of the problem. You have opportunity cost of sanctions. So Iran has been under sanctions for years now, and sanctions have had negative effect on Iran's economy. The sanctions are the result of the regime's policy. So many of these sanctions, you can actually remove them by an executive order. So those sanctions that are imposed by the president's executive order, they can be annulled by president executive order. Those that are imposed by the Congress, the president can actually suspend them very quickly. So the moment you resolve this nuclear issue, the moment you stop funding terrorism, the moment you stop your regional aggression, these are all the causes of the sanctions. Then these sanctions can be suspended, so you won't have that opportunity cost of sanctions. You have Iran is spending like billions of dollars per year. Our estimate is like 4 or 5 billion. It fluctuates every year, obviously, directly on funding terrorism. So these are the cash, these are the goods that go to these terrorist groups like Hamas, Hezbollah. These are the money can be directly invested in the Iranian economy. There is a lot of service, like training, bringing them to Iran, giving them fellowship, giving them housing. That's not part of this estimate, the $4 or $5 billion that I said. So those are the money, again, that can go to the Iranian economy. And then it has a very huge indirect effect on Iran's economy. One is through sanction. The other one is that no one is investing in Iran. There is very little FDI in Iran, and I think those FDI that comes to Iran, which is mainly from China, I think that's Iran's own money that's being used as collateral, and in accounting is considered as FDI, but it's Iran's own money. Basically, Iran doesn't have much of FDI. So these are the problems. And a lot of these problems can be quickly reversed the moment that the regime falls. But there is one key condition there, and that's security. So you need to have, when the regime falls, you need to have security. You cannot have civil war. You cannot have, political parties that have armed groups, like what Hezbollah has in Lebanon. Unfortunately, in our opposition, you have some of these groups that have like a political wing, and then they have a military wing. That's not going to work. So if you can bring stability and security to Iran, a lot of economic problem of the country can be quickly reversed, can be quickly solved, and the Iranian can quickly go back to a situation that can enjoy freedom and prosperity.
Excellent. We have a few other items, and then we'll open it up for questions if you'd like to prepare. But So as far as, we've talked about kind of the human capital layer of the potential in Iran. I think the area we've kind of stayed away from, I think it's interesting to note that we've not talked about the energy opportunity and all of the options in other minerals and other options. So, it's, if we want to maybe touch on some of the economic opportunities and how maybe, Saeed, I know you just spoke, so maybe the other two can touch on that first, but just beyond just getting full dollar for the price of oil, but maybe technology that could be brought in to enhance the energy and other mineral aspects of the economy.
I mean, I don't invest in oil. So
Yeah.
That might be a Saeed question.
So Saeed, yeah, I
So
know.
one thing that can quickly help Iranian economy is to ramp up the fossil fuel production. So Iran was producing up to 5-6 million barrels per day before the revolution. Our production has fallen a lot since the regime has come to power. Right now it's around 2.73 million. Iran is exporting like 1.4 million barrels per day on average right now in 2023. And again, if you resolve the sanctions problem, if you can have the foreign companies come and invest in Iran's energy production, you can quickly ramp up this production. You can quickly take back your export markets. And that would be a huge injection of cash into Iran's economy. And that can go to infrastructure, that can go to help people to increase their quality of life. It's not just oil, you have the gas issue. One of the key problems with the Iranian gas is the political issue. So we have the second biggest natural gas resources. And right now that Russia cannot, Europeans are trying to get rid of Russia on the gas issue, we cannot export to them because we don't have we actually import natural gas. Iran is actually importing natural gas from Turkmenistan. And Qatar, which is, if you look at Qatar, they are very friendly with the regime. Qatar has been giving the regime its lobbying arms. Qatar has been funding the American universities. Over 10 years, they have spent $1.2 billion. So next time you are asking yourself, why are all these regime lobby people are in the best universities? That's the reason, because Qatar has spent $1.2 billion over a decade, and Qatar is sharing these resources with the regime. Qatar has spent a lot of money in creating a media empire. Qatar is sharing this media empire with the regime. Qatar has spent a lot of money on creating a lobbying empire in the DC. A lot of people in DC are on Qatar's payroll, unfortunately. And Qatar is sharing this lobbying arm with the regime. And Qatar has been benefiting a lot from the Islamic regime being in Iran. One is the most obvious one is gas. We share the South Pars field with them, so they are taking all of it. We are getting nothing. The other one is Qatar right now is the financial hub of the region. Iran could be the financial hub of the region if the Islamist regime was not funding terrorism, if it was not funding regional aggression, if it was accepting AML and ATF measures. It doesn't. And Qatar is helping the regime to stay in power, and Qatar is now the financial hub in the region. So again, there are a lot of areas like the energy. Another area that we lost a lot of technological revolution waves. So India, one of the ways that they grew is when the Western companies offshored the labor force. So we didn't get anything from that. because we are totally isolated. Iran is so isolated that actually during the COVID, everyone had a contraction in their economy. Iran actually grew a little bit. So same thing like during the financial crisis. So that's because we are so isolated from the global economy. Whatever happens in the world, it really doesn't affect us. So if we can get connected to the global economy, a lot of these issues will be resolved very quickly. It's not a joke. It's not something, fake promise. A lot of these issues can be quickly resolved. The condition, again, is security. And that's why I hear a lot about unity. You cannot go and have unity with groups whose goal is, for example, secession. That doesn't bring security to Iran. That doesn't bring prosperity to Iran. So unity should be with people who have the same goal, and if that happens, when the regime falls, they can actually push the regime to fall, and when the regime falls, they can actually rebuild Iran very quickly.
Given that education is so readily available, if Iran opens up, I would recommend skipping that services mentality and going directly to domestically producing innovation. And what we saw and I participated in this with India, is we started working on an outsourced basis, as you mentioned, with India for our semiconductor companies and our software companies 20 years ago, probably was when I started doing it. But we saw a shift happen during that period of time where the Indian teams became confident and they became smarter and they became more experienced, and then they started taking over more and more of the development, and now they're developing their own products, and we're seeing that shift. But what I'm recommending here is when you open up, when you achieve security and stability, go right to innovation and just build the bridges directly with the leading universities, with the hospitals in the world that are pumping out the most innovation. Stay away from the early stage. The big mistake is when you open something up and then you don't have fine enough rules. Only work with the most innovative and the strongest. And have that mindset of we're going to bring the best in. And then don't pick too many things. Pick the pillars that match to the needs of the country. And if the need, for example, that I mentioned before around water, if you have scarce water but you need food, go get that solution. It's readily available. It's coming up. And transform the country and make it a breadbasket. It's possible. We're at this crazy time in humanity. We keep hearing about artificial intelligence and about computing power, but really all it is it's an infrastructure that's going to allow the world to accelerate in meaningful ways, in ways that can impact our economy and our lives. I think Iran can take advantage of that and skip so many steps.
I was going to totally echo what you said about the innovation, because I think there's a lot of focus on the oil and the energy, and there's people for that is very important, but I think there's so much more, because I think having, dignity in the workplace and the solutions being part of your own country's solutions, I think is important. And what we see right now in an economy that's 70% state-owned is, what is that to look forward to? What does a young person go up and say, hey, I'm proud of what I'm doing, right? And I think we've partnered on some innovations. I think it'd be awesome to just hear about a couple of them from you, because you mentioned about the food one. Some people might wonder, okay, how do you reduce 99% of water? I think talking a little bit about Greenlight and a little bit about Lufa Farms, giving physical examples. I mean, Lufa does almost 3% of Montreal's produce on 2 or 3 rooftop farms.
Yeah.
What are some of these specific solutions so we can move into the concrete of what this could actually look like in Iran?
I'll talk about Greenlight real quick. So Greenlight Bioscience is a company that we started out of Stanford University over a decade ago. And the idea was that the world has, and we've all seen this, you've heard of companies like DuPont and Monsanto, but in the last 50 years we created a chemical industry based on a technology called fermentation, which at its base is a petroleum-based technology to create the world's products, whether they be cosmetics or drugs or the crop, the material we spray on our crops for agriculture. And what we've seen is the rise of disease, cancer specifically. And so we 10, 15 years ago said we need to transition to a biological way of producing the world's materials, whether it be nutraceuticals or our cosmetics or our foods. And so we went on that journey. And so what's interesting about that is we had a very country-specific view. We said, let's build this production capability, and then let's make sure that if a country wants to bring it in, they can then gain control of being able to bioproduce their vaccines or any of the things I mentioned before. And so that's it's a great concrete example where, and we're not the only one doing it. It's an industry. It's driving forward. You've probably heard of regulations that are banning chemicals on fields in Europe, because Europe was the first to say, you know what, no more of these terrible chemicals. You can only use biologicals to grow the food. That's going to continue to evolve. That industry is moving very quickly. Iran can intercept that industry and bring domestic production of biological material right into Iran, and then be in control of producing cleaner ways of producing the materials that people consume. That's really exciting. Or for the diseases or vaccines. So that's a really interesting example. Loofah Farms is a company we started about a decade ago as well. And the idea there was that we need to stop building supply chains around food that are all around the world. It's crazy. We've got to build our own food production in the city that we live. So we started to build very large food production sites on large roofs of buildings in a city. And we did it in Montreal as a prototype because we wanted to prove that this would work. And now we're on our 5th roof on top of a Walmart superstore. But we're now feeding about 3% of the city. And we're going to continue to grow that. And we grow 100 varieties of vegetables, herbs, and fruits. And so it's a very feasible thing to bring into cities, is the ability to produce food. And it turns out for every ton of food that we produce, we do so with 99% less water, and we produce a much cleaner product. So that's another example of solution mindset on things.
Yeah, I think that pretty much covers all the prepared remarks, or is there anything we wanted to add that we, not yet? If not, we'll open it up to questions. Thank you so much for so far. In the back.
Thank you. First of all, thank you. This was a lot of information. I wanted to ask, and I'm sorry if you already answered that, but the way it sounded to me, it was like all of these solutions that we were saying was for already a democratic Iran, not right now. Like, we're not talking about decreasing sanctions or innovations or anything right now, because we're doing the opposite right now. Everybody wants more sanctions. People in Iran are self-sanctioning by going on strike. So that was, if I understood this right, so then my question is, how do these companies get to a free Iran? Because isn't it, Saeed just said it, Qatar, but not just the Arabic countries, are doing business with Iran. We know, even though we have these sanctions, most countries found a way to bypass these sanctions. We had the Instex, where they were actually trying to do that. Germany is still the biggest trade partner. So these companies are still making business with a terrorist regime. My question is, and Rostam mentioned that, companies or investors are afraid when they see instability. And I'm sure they can see the instability in the Islamic regime. So how, or what are you guys' suggestions on using that to convince this money cartel that is right now working with the regime that a free Iran will be a better investment for them? How do we get these money cartels to stop supporting the regime, and whatever money they're putting into, Qatar putting into schools and sending Islamic regime people to these prestigious schools, send us there, start supporting our side, because it is in their interest to have a free Iran? If you can give us some suggestions there, that would be great.
I think one thing to say, first of all, could not agree with you more. I think the vast majority are already there of companies. I think after this last week's terrorist attacks, the price of doing business with Iran is even higher. I think there's telling these stories, having investigative journalism, for people who actually play in finance, understanding like litigation finance and opportunities along those are really important. Or activist hedge funds go out and actually short some of these companies. Those are things that, like, if anyone wants to talk about in more detail, happy to. I don't know if it's relevant for this room, but I absolutely think that media plays a huge role. The optics of these companies, their shareholders, board members, it's going to be company suicide here pretty shortly. I don't know why it is not already, but I think activist hedge funds is a great example of that. I have friends in that line of work. I'm sure you do as well. But how do we make it financially unviable? There are ways to do that. You can fund lawsuits. You can fund. There's many ways we're involved with it. So happy to talk about that more offline.
One thing to add, I think, is just this week's events are a huge catalyst, and I also suspect that the oil situation is not going to stay the way it is. I personally think that the SPR, the petroleum reserve in the United States is extremely low, and if things continue to escalate, that can draw even more attention. So I think the key part of the point of the project is to build the infrastructure that most of the people in this room are aware has, thanks to Nufti and others, is starting to come in place to say, here's what prevents the future Iran from deteriorating into Iraq or Syria, right? Like, the point is, you have to say it's going to take work, and there's an obvious opportunity, but it's got to take work before it actually can get there. And if you don't do anything, then it very easily could deteriorate. And then, so working presently to make that plan so that there is a transition, and efforts from these countries and from these events can be converted into output instead of just disgust and despair.
And I do think, to pick up that, having like a wide-scale smear campaign of the companies that do that, it'll take taking one or two down, and then the rest will be afraid. So really, if we can hammer one or two down as a collective, make that commitment and say, this is not going to fly. And this was echoed on an earlier panel, but these families that have sucked the blood of the Iranian people, and they're living billionaire lifestyles and lavish townhomes in London and all over the world, I think that needs to be a massive smear campaign. I mean, I personally think we should go take these people's homes and say, hey, this is Iran's property now, right? Like, they're people of Iran, not this terrorist regime. I think we have not done enough in going after those people. I hope we see wide-scale media reports, and actually, now that we have the political will, actually momentum. Let's actually implement this idea, like, now. That's where my head's at.
So any firm's goal is to maximize the market value of the firm for its shareholder. So what Rostam said about litigation finance, about activist shareholders is very important. It hasn't been done in the Iranian case that much. There has been some activity, but not very much. One solution beyond what Rostam said can be have an Iran index, like have a rating of companies that are exposed to Iran, how much they are doing trade with Iran, how much they are investing in Iran. So that would, if you can then add it to ESG or just have it as an independent index, that would pressure on these firms. At the policy level, you need to have a path to victory package for the policyholders, for the investors, so they know that there is a path to victory. How can we overthrow this regime? And then you need to have the day after package. So what happens the day after? What would be the opportunities for you? And Nufti's IPP project is focusing on the second part, the day after, and Nufti is a maximum support project. It's really focusing on the first part, the path to victory one. So we need to work along those lines to convince the policymakers and investors that dealing with the regime is the wrong path to go, and helping the Iranian people actually will help them too.
Thank you. Any additional questions? Here in the middle. Or Kamran is...
Sorry, I'll take a prerogative here, I apologize. Saeed, you mentioned IPP, you guys talked about it as well. Dave, you talked about this obviously as the only non-Iranian on the panel, but we're very thankful that you're here. As an investor, as a business person, I know we talked about this panel, what makes Iran unique in some ways. But for you as an investor looking at that market across different sectors, across different verticals and industries, what makes Iran attractive for you, and as a business person who I know is not just interested in the profit or what you take home at the end of the day, which is obviously important for you and your other investors, but beyond the interesting industries, what makes it interesting for you as a project? You, I'm sure, can go invest in many places and make lots of money. So A, on the economic front, but B, also as more of a passion, why are you speaking at the future of the Iran conference, but the future of investing in Iran and not any of the other nearly 200 countries out there? What makes it so interesting for you?
One observation I would have is that we're living in a global world more than ever. We are more connected than we ever have been. But I've always had an orientation to partner with special people that had special ideas on what they wanted to achieve. Early in my career, I partnered with 3 Iranian gentlemen that had immigrated during their education. It was in the mid to late 90s. And we ended up building a very successful company in California together. I've worked with people that have found their way to the United States from different countries and then gone back and worked with the countries that they came from. Haven't been able to do that in Iran. I think that I'm very much of the opinion that education is just so readily available. If we open up Iran, that if we team that with the right bridges, that Iran will just take off. Absolutely. And it would be it's a large country. It's got so much diversity to it. And so I'm very hopeful that if the country opens up, we can lean in, bridge it, and then get it going. So.
I think we have time for one more question, please. Up front. All right.
My name is Sharif-Emami, and this question is for you, Rostam. First, I want to say that how proud I am of you, your brother, and young people in this room who, instead of being out there doing what young people do and have fun, they're sitting here and helping the rest of us understand the young generation and how the young generation will help us to achieve our goals. There are not very many people in their mid-20s to be as blessed, and it's not just a blessing. I know it's been your brain and smart and hard work and everything put together. But there are a lot of people out there, young and passionate and energetic, that will build our future of our Iran. And those are the people that not only I'm proud of, but I'm hoping people like you will motivate. And I want to ask you, my question is, do you have a message for anyone in your generation who has the heart and who has the passion to do so? But like some of the people on the panel earlier said, what do we do? How do we do it? How can I help? Do you have a message for your generation who wants to be helpful?
I think my generation has gotten the message loud and clear. I think it's the older generation, and I said I was going to say it, but I've been so disappointed in our larger community in mobilizing in terms of resources. Like, you know, we, at some point, I think it's from the trauma of coming over our families, but we have to realize that, you know, it's not about if we have gold watches and plastic souls, it means nothing. And we have to put aside this materialism, and we look at these activists who give, you know, life and limb. We look at their courage and their sacrifice, and it inspires us. But how much courage and sacrifice do we show? How many of us are willing to say, you know what, I'm willing to put 10% of what I have to this, 20%, 50%, you know? How many on that wall there have given 100%, have 110%? And I think for me, it's that generation that I hope comes into the aid, because the young people have been in the streets dying. For me, you know, my reason to see a free Iran is very simple. You know, I love my grandparents. They've given so much for Iran. I want them to see a free Iran, like while they're alive. That's my life's mission is that. That's the answer to your question. And you know, I didn't know they were playing this video, but this video they played, you saw all these parents and grandparents of kids who've lost their lives. And it just reminds me of the story my grandfather has told me since I was a kid of the Shahnameh. We all know the story of Zahak and the story of Ka'abeh Feridun, a great champion who rises against the Serpent King. And Ka'abeh has like 40-something kids, and when his last son is called an execution, he comes in barging, and he looks at Zahak, and he says what that Iranian grandmother said about her, you killed my grandson. He says, why is it that you, who have so much, you have all this power, why are you taking why is the only thing that's our share fire and brimstone and suffering? And that's what Iranian parents and grandparents are asking. And I think the message for me would be, know your history, know your mythology. We've faced this evil before, we'll face it again. But that spirit that rises up to meet that evil is also in us. You know, read Shahnameh, read Hafez, read Maulana, read Nasser Khosrow, read our greats. They're indoctrinating their military with brainwashed, evil, darkness. Let's efface that with education, with inspiration, with poetry, with literature. Let's show them what Iran really is, because it's in all of our homes and all of our hearts. But it's not going to happen until we all show up, you know, and say, you know what, we're going to take risks, we're going to sacrifice. You know, I think that's what it's going to take.
I think that's a perfect place to end it. So thank you, everyone on the panel. Thank you.
Thank you to our panelists. Please join us now for a brief networking and coffee break.